1 week earlier, the narrative crashes into the small frontier nation of Grills. Overwhelmed by a sudden letter, a beautiful girl gasps, questioning if a marriage proposal has truly arrived for her. Bursting into the room, an energetic maid enthusiastically confirms the incredible news while serving a fresh pot of tea. Dread instantly sets in as the princess wonders if the proposal is from the primate leader who demanded her as his 13th concubine. She winces, her face twisting in sheer disgust at the horrifying thought. Slamming her hand down, she aggressively declares that any old geezer driven only by his lower half is completely out of the question. Sighing heavily, the stressed young woman officially introduces herself as First Princess Mireille of Grills. She angrily rants about the shameless 80-year-old suitor trying to marry a princess younger than his granddaughter, viciously wishing his rotting lower half would fall off. Forcing herself to calm down, she reflects that her people mostly belong to the lowest-ranked race in the world, the rodent tribe descended from mice. She bitterly notes that Grills remains just a tiny rural nation with very little territory to claim. Recalling ancient history, she remembers that in the distant past, certain animals miraculously evolved into human forms. The rodent tribe emerged as one such evolved race, while other creatures remained mere animals. Cursed with unimpressive magic and abilities, the mousefolk cannot fight and are hopelessly limited to cultivating crops. Their crippling weakness forces them to suffer the aftermath of neighboring wars, having faced mass starvation 10 years ago during the brutal conflict between the scaled and bird tribes. Staring blankly, Mireille solemnly concludes that a princess from such a weak, destitute nation could never be appealing to anyone. Noticing her maid's growing frustration, the princess gently attempts to de-escalate the situation. Taking a delicate sip of her freshly poured tea, Mireille cheerfully praises the delicious berries to lighten the mood. Lulu trembles with quiet fury because Mireille actually considers a 13th concubine offer a blessing just because she has never received a single marriage proposal before. Swiftly changing the subject, Mireille smiles and tells Lulu she is deeply glad the maid has learned to brew such delicious tea. Returning to her deep-seated insecurities, Mireille admits she lacks any outstanding traits and has already passed the typical marriageable age. Despite her own crushing resignation, she sincerely appreciates that Lulu is getting furiously angry on her behalf. She laments feeling completely left behind by society, knowing most girls are happily married by 15 while she is already 18. Convinced of her absolute unworthiness, she claims her pitiful magic capacity guarantees no neighboring nation would ever want a marriage with someone like her. Furthermore, she accepts that the rodent tribe suffers from the harsh, unavoidable reality of aging early and having desperately short lifespans. Unable to hold back any longer, Lulu snaps at the princess for her constant self-deprecation, clarifying loudly that the proposal isn't even from a neighboring country. Still blindly rambling about her flaws, Mireille highlights her worthless power and the disappointingly scrawny body typical of the rodent tribe. Stunned into absolute silence, she finally absorbs Lulu's explosive words and questions if the proposal truly came from the Drake Kingdom. Ruling over vast lands, the legendary Drake Kingdom is universally known as the original race from which all animals began evolving into humans. Heralded widely as the race of the gods, these divine descendants of dragons stand as a true top-class, highest-ranked species. Even after thousands of years, their immense magical capacity has never waned, overwhelmingly surpassing the raw power of all other races combined. Smirking in triumph, Lulu stares back at her bewildered mistress with a silent, incredibly smug expression as the truth finally sets in. Reality crashing down hard, Mireille urgently points out that a supreme nation like the Drake Kingdom would never concern itself with a tiny place like theirs. She remains entirely baffled, wondering why a royal suitor of that magnitude even bothered coming to a small nation's festival in the first place. Beaming with pride, Lulu cheerfully reveals that the royal suitor fell madly in love with Princess Mireille at first sight when he attended the festival. During this year's Harvest Prayer Festival, the young Dragon King of the Drake Kingdom had unexpectedly made a grand appearance. Determined to claim Mireille as his queen, he has apparently promised to completely handle all preparations and expenses for the union. Although it sounds exactly like a miraculous event out of a fairy tale, Mireille realizes there is one massive, glaring problem. Forcing a painfully awkward smile, she sarcastically calls it a lovely story before pointing out the fatal flaw in the narrative. She firmly reminds Lulu that she did not even attend this year's festival because she was entirely absent due to illness. This stands in stark, horrifying contrast to the official invitations, which explicitly stated that the first princess was scheduled to greet all incoming guests. On that exact day, Mireille had been helplessly bedridden, suffering from severe nausea and crippling stomach pain. A horrifying realization washes over her pale face as the disastrous puzzle pieces finally fall into place. The person who actually stepped up and greeted the guests was her sister, second Princess Emilia, a rare rodent tribe member possessing healing powers who is widely known as the Saintly Lady. Having already married into the Scaled tribe's Snake Kingdom at 15, Emilia had only returned temporarily for the festival to properly greet the guests. As a rare albino with beautiful white hair and striking red eyes, Emilia's delicate appearance sparked fierce protective instincts and earned her countless marriage offers from neighboring countries. Lulu recalls that the Dragon King initially looked quite displeased, but instantly transformed into a perfectly smiling gentleman the moment he actually spoke with Emilia, who greeted him instead. Clutching her head in pure, unadulterated panic, Mireille realizes the Dragon King unquestionably mistook her for the beautiful Emilia. She frantically reasons that it is completely natural for the supreme king of a faraway, great nation to not know the true face of a small nation's princess. Desperate for any possible loophole, Mireille asks if Emilia did not give her name, but Lulu heavily doubts that she did. Completely resigned to her disastrous fate, Mireille realizes Emilia was far too swept away by the magical moment to correct the monumental misunderstanding. Sighing wistfully, Lulu swoons over how super handsome the Dragon King was. She proudly recalls how everyone universally praised the man as a living jewel, unmatched in sheer beauty and refinement. Pressing her point, the eager maid enthusiastically insists that marrying into the Drake Kingdom would be incredible, utterly convinced the royal would understand if he just stayed by Mireille's side. Shaking her head, Mireille gently deflects the praise and firmly reminds her maid that the Drake Kingdom simply misunderstood, meaning they are absolutely not to blame. Furiously defending her mistress, Lulu angrily scolds Mireille for not taking the situation seriously, aggressively declaring that the princess is far kinder and more wonderful than Lady Emilia. Leaning in close with fierce loyalty, Lulu passionately demands that Mireille must take her along when she departs. Startled by the sudden outburst, the princess appreciates the fierce sentiment but remains confident that her father will swiftly correct the misunderstanding once the suitors learn Emilia is already married to another country. Breaking the heavy tension, Mireille affectionately murmurs her loyal maid's name while splitting a small piece of fruit. Smiling softly, the gentle princess offers one of the 2 tiny seeds hidden inside the fruit to her devoted companion. Watching her mistress closely, Lulu internally weeps for her poor princess, utterly heartbroken over how painfully tiny Mireille's happiness truly is. The narrative abruptly shifts to a flashback, revealing a nervous guard who recalls chatting leisurely despite the looming tension. Standing before her imposing father, a shocked Mireille explicitly questions if she is truly the one ordered to go to the Drake Kingdom. Glaring down at his scrawny daughter, the king brutally states that she wouldn't even serve as an adequate substitute anyway. Stroking his thick beard, the calculating ruler clarifies that he isn't actually commanding her to permanently marry the royal suitor. Stammering in absolute confusion, the terrified princess points out that the Drake Kingdom is explicitly asking for Emilia, a fact her father calmly confirms. Pointing decisively to a map, the king outlines a treacherous scheme where Mireille only needs to buy time until Emilia can be divorced from the Snake Kingdom's crown prince and sent to the Drake Kingdom. Horrified by the sheer recklessness of the plan, Mireille warns that stealing away a newlywed princess will undoubtedly spark a new war with the conflict favoring Snake Kingdom. Sweating profusely under the pressure, her stressed father violently snaps that he already knows the terrifying risks involved. He desperately justifies the insane gamble by insisting that securing the divine alliance is clearly more beneficial to their struggling country. The king emphasizes that their target is the divine Dragon King of the Drake Kingdom, who explicitly wishes to welcome Emilia as a true queen rather than a mere concubine. Pressuring his vulnerable daughter, the king coldly orders her not to overthink the highly dangerous situation. Revealing a fortunate loophole, the king explains the official request simply asked to make first Princess Mireille the queen, instructing her to board the carriage as if she hadn't noticed the glaring mistake. Trembling with intense fear, Mireille frantically protests that once the Drake Kingdom inevitably uncovers the deception, their resulting wrath will be completely immeasurable. She desperately argues that deceiving the Drake Kingdom, even temporarily as a substitute, is a massive mistake that will only buy them a minuscule amount of time. Reminding her father of their immense debt, she tearfully stresses that the Drake Kingdom granted them incredible favor by ending the brutal war 10 years ago. Gasping for breath, the frantic princess desperately tries to string her final, impassioned argument together. Slamming his hand down with explosive fury, the enraged king violently commands his daughter to stay silent as she dares question his memory. Recalling the festival vividly, he describes the magnificent pair of the dignified dragon king and the beautiful saintly lady Emilia, a living picture of jewels that anyone would rightfully envy and bless. Sneering at Mireille's pathetic illness during the festival, the cruel father declares that successfully securing this divine marriage is the absolute best way to repay their lingering debt. Delivering the final devastating blow, he bluntly reveals that Emilia has already agreed to the dark scheme, callously noting she only married the snake crown prince out of mere affection anyway. Struck completely pale by the cruel revelation, Mireille desperately begs him to reconsider her beloved sister's true will. The king heartlessly quotes Emilia, claiming she willingly accepted the heavy burden of marrying the Drake King for the absolute sake of their homeland. Pushing a heavy ledger into her trembling hands, he demands she look at the unbelievable marriage compensation, coldly dismissing any lingering fears that the Dragon King might withdraw out of pure devotion. Staring in absolute horror, Mireille realizes that if this were just Lulu's idle gossip she could easily ignore it, but her own father and sister are actively choosing this highly destructive path. Trembling violently while scanning the ledger, the terrified princess understands her family desperately wants this reckless marriage to happen purely because of the unprecedented compensation offered. Sweat dripping down her face, she deduces that the massive fortune has caused them to completely lose their reason, blindingly driving their dangerous determination. The oppressive, heavy silence hangs in the room as the greedy king coldly glares down at his deeply conflicted daughter. Lost in a swirling storm of terrifying thoughts, the young princess wanders away to a quiet stone enclave, profoundly questioning what she should do next. Clutching her hands in solitary prayer, she agonizes over her own uselessness, acknowledging her meager magic while recognizing that firmly securing this marriage would keep their vulnerable nation safe forever. A dark, deeply cynical realization washes over her mind, grimly assuring her that by throwing her life away, she finally possesses a tangible use. Staring blankly at the rough stone walls, Mireille tragically accepts that, unlike her gifted sister Emilia, she truly has no healing powers or redeeming qualities whatsoever. She grimly reflects on the rodent tribe's pathetic military strength, silently acknowledging they are so poor at fighting that she hasn't contributed to the nation even once. Horrific memories of the devastating war 10 years ago violently flood her mind, recalling a time when everyday life grew unbearably harsh even without direct fighting. The haunting flashback suddenly reveals a younger, terrified Mireille huddled closely alongside freezing, desperate children during the absolute peak of the brutal conflict. A larger, dirt-stained hand firmly grips a ragged sleeve, physically highlighting the visceral, desperate struggle for mere survival in the frozen ruins. An exhausted elder weeps openly in profound gratitude, tightly clutching a small offering of bread while a starving infant looks on in pure, gut-wrenching desperation. Staring through eyes brimming with traumatized tears, Mireille remembers feeling entirely useless, agonizing over the fact that there was almost nothing a weak girl like her could do to help. Watching grown men desperately haul shattered timber to rebuild their broken lives, the harsh, undeniable reality of her sheer powerlessness as a child crushes her lingering spirit. Gathering her broken courage, she finally resolves to embrace the highly reckless scheme, deciding that if there is even a tiny chance everyone can live happier, she must sacrifice herself. Staring out into the peaceful horizon, she remembers that peace only returned to their fragile lands thanks to the late Dragon King's supreme mercy, completely shaping her ultimate decision to pay their massive debt. The impoverished people of Grills live precariously on the edge of ruin. Despite their daily struggles, the region itself remains severely financially strained. Someone reflects somberly on their fleeting time, wondering if this might be the very last visit they can make. A young girl steps softly into the clearing. Her arrival startles a small flock of resting birds, sending them scattering into the air with a rustle. Turning away from the scattered birds, the girl looks out peacefully toward the bright horizon. The day of departure finally arrives. A solemn voice commands Mireille to listen closely to the final plan. They finalize the sudden arrangement to send Emilia away to the Drake Kingdom. However, they acknowledge there is still a little bit of time left to prepare. Mireille is instructed to avoid showing her face as much as possible. Fortunately, they note that the bride and groom rarely meet before the actual wedding day. Dressed as the royal bride, Mireille stands quietly in her intricately embroidered gown. She keeps her face completely obscured by a thick, heavy veil. A lavish, ornate carriage waits patiently outside the estate. The royal attendants stand at attention, ready to escort the new bride. A nearby attendant pauses to look at the veiled bride. She openly marvels at how beautiful the young woman appears. The waiting attendants bow gracefully and offer to take the bride's luggage. Stepping out into the courtyard, the elegant maids bow respectfully near the royal carriage. They prepare to load the belongings for the long journey. The head maid smiles warmly at the heavily veiled bride. Behind her lace covering, the young woman sweats nervously under the sudden attention. A younger maid with short hair stands attentively by the carriage. She waits for the signal to begin the royal escort. Gesturing toward the open carriage door, the elegant attendant asks if they shall go. The royal escort prepares to finally leave the estate. The bride stammers awkwardly, completely overwhelmed by the head attendant's striking beauty. Confused by her reaction, the attendant asks what is the matter. The attendant questions why the bride is not bringing her own lady-in-waiting. Mireille replies that she wants her to remain in a familiar place. The attendant assures her not to worry, claiming the treasury will be emptied to prepare countless things for the true bride. Hearing this, Mireille secretly wonders if it is really okay to arrive as Emilia with nothing but herself. The veiled bride asks the attendants not to be offended by her lack of an entourage. She explains that she declined everyone's send-off because she wishes to leave quietly. The majestic carriage begins its long journey away from the estate. The horses trot steadily through the scenic, sunlit countryside. Sitting alone in the carriage, the nervous bride pulls back the curtain. She peers out the window to watch her old life fade away. In her mind, she recalls Lulu crying out that she wanted to come with her. The emotional memory tugs at her heart. She steels her resolve, knowing she is heading to a dangerous place. She decides firmly that she cannot take a precious child into the unknown. Approaching the sprawling capital nestled in the distant mountains, she stares at the horizon. She silently tells herself that she must steel her resolve. Despite her inner pep talk, anxiety completely takes over. Cold sweat drips down her face beneath the heavy veil. The carriage enters the imposing capital city. A single bird flies past the towering, monolithic stone structures. The bird soars high above the massive architectural arches of the palace walls. The sheer scale of the building dwarfs everything around it. Looking up, she realizes this place is entirely different from anything she has ever known. Staring at a distant tower, she notes she cannot even see its top through the haze. Mireille shrinks back into her heavy dress as she stands in the grand hall. The vast, polished floors and ornate walls make her feel incredibly small. She trembles as she observes streets built on an entirely different scale. The palace itself is practically dripping with unimaginable wealth and splendor. Peering out over a massive balcony, she is shocked by the sheer magnitude of the view. She gasps as she realizes the capital stretches endlessly all the way to the horizon. She observes that the living environment is incredibly refined. The entire city seems to be overflowing with vibrant energy and magic. Panic fully sets in as she admits this is entirely beyond what she imagined. Sweating profusely, she realizes she does not even have a plan yet and is surviving on bravado alone. An attendant approaches and respectfully addresses her as Princess Mireille. The maid gently instructs the anxious bride to look in the mirror. The maids gush over her stunning reflection, declaring her exceptionally beautiful. They assure her that His Majesty the Dragon King will surely be delighted with his new bride. She touches the dress, marveling that its fabric is of the absolute highest quality. Even the intricate embroidery is breathtakingly delicate. Examining her own reflection closer, she is stunned by the magical transformation. She notes happily that her hair and skin have become incredibly glossy. The attendant warns her about her dangerous expression and asks if she likes the dress. Mireille agrees, admitting that everything here is vastly different from her homeland. Suddenly, the attendant announces that preparations for the ceremony are completely finished. She casually asks if they shall go, leaving Mireille utterly startled. The narrative loops back to the very beginning, catching up to the present moment. Mireille panics as the unexpected ceremony immediately begins. She internally screams, remembering that they promised her this would be simple. She had no idea she would be thrown directly into such a grand, public ceremony. Frozen in the center of the massive hall, she is overwhelmed by the spectacle. She sweats under her veil, completely unprepared for this far too unexpected event. A massive, elegantly dressed crowd watches the royal couple in absolute silence. She stands stiffly, paralyzed by the fact that she only just arrived. As the groom steps forward, she panics, thinking the wedding was supposed to be on the solstice. Unable to say that out loud in this tense atmosphere, she desperately begs him to wait. Ignoring her silent pleas, the groom reaches out and effortlessly removes her one and only veil. She gasps as her final layer of defense is stripped away. Looking up, the very first thing she sees is the Dragon King himself. She is instantly mesmerized by his shimmering golden hair and striking crimson eyes. The intense, vivid color of his gaze traps her completely. She feels that if she stares too long, she might literally melt and burn away. As she looks deeper into his gaze, a sudden realization hits her. She recognizes that he possesses the exact same deep red eyes as Emilia. They lock eyes in a tense, breathless moment of absolute silence. The Dragon King stares down at her and lets out a soft, intrigued sound. Completely captivated by his overwhelming presence, all of her previous fears momentarily vanish. She admits to herself that the rumors were true, and he truly looks like a divine being. The false bride sweats profusely, her face twisting into a mask of pure panic. Staring wide-eyed, she stammers out a nervous, terrified exclamation. She mentally prepares to confess that the woman standing before him is an unknown stranger, Emilia's elder sister. Swallowing her fear, she realizes she must admit that the bride he actually wished for was her sister. The Dragon King stares down at her in silence, leaving her completely frozen in terror. Trembling before the royal crowd, she internally screams, desperately wondering what she is supposed to do now. Trapped by circumstance with absolutely no way to resist, the sudden marriage ceremony forcefully begins. Standing beside the imposing Dragon King, the terrified bride realizes she has to show her face proudly before the massive crowd. Panic grips her heart as she acknowledges the grave reality of her situation. She stares up at the Dragon King of the Drake Kingdom, the one person who must never under any circumstances see her true face. Trapped at the altar under his piercing gaze, her mind races with pure dread. She brutally concludes that standing completely exposed before him is the absolute worst possible situation. The ceremony progresses as the Dragon King calmly gestures to the crowd. Standing rigidly beside him, the exhausted false bride lets out a shaky, internal sigh of despair. Walking away from the altar, she grimly assumes that everything ends right here. However, dread quickly replaces her resignation as she realizes she will not just be forcibly sent home, but punished severely. The tense silence of the palace hallway is suddenly broken by a sharp, echoing sound. An elegant high heel strikes the polished floor with commanding authority. A strict, sharp-eyed attendant appears, her presence radiating intense authority. The sudden arrival of the imposing woman causes the bride to jolt in alarm. Momentarily escaping the intense scrutiny of the crowd, the exhausted bride collapses slightly. She lets out a heavy breath, relieved to finally have a brief second of respite. The commanding attendant turns around, her sharp gaze locking onto the exhausted girl. Noting the bride's fatigue, she smoothly suggests that they proceed slowly through the grand halls. The elegant maid notes her apparent fatigue and politely asks if she would like to rest a little. Forcing a nervous, strained smile, the panicked bride insists that she is perfectly fine. The royal entourage continues their steady march down the sprawling palace corridor. Surrounded by the elegant attendants, the impostor bride walks stiffly, feeling completely out of place. Unable to control her overwhelming anxiety, the fake bride nervously shifts her gaze. She covertly glances around at the stunning women flanking her on all sides. She notes with awe that everyone present possesses magical power entirely incomparable to her own rodent tribe. Looking at their radiant faces, she admits they are all so dazzlingly beautiful that it literally hurts to look at them. Surrounded completely by such breathtakingly beautiful people, she feels her confidence shatter into pieces. She bitterly concludes that anyone would mistake her for a common maid, feeling exactly like a sewer rat that somehow snuck into the palace. Her gaze settles on the striking head attendant, completely mesmerized by her perfect grace and appearance. Defeated, she internally admits that the maid is far more princess-like than she could ever hope to be. She watches Lady Nile, the imposing and flawless head lady-in-waiting, glide effortlessly through the hall. The sheer elegance of the head maid only deepens the impostor's crushing sense of inadequacy. The flawlessly beautiful head maid suddenly shifts her sharp eyes, catching the impostor staring. Caught completely off guard, the terrified fake bride flinches as she realizes Nile noticed her gaze. Her thoughts frantically spiral back to the rushed preparations made back in the impoverished Grill's kingdom. She frantically tries to piece together how her current reality differs from the original plan. As Lady Nile calmly directs her to walk this way, the imposter's mind races with dangerous questions. She desperately wonders if, speaking of the bride's appearance, the head maid has not been told anything about what she is supposed to look like. She recalls the strict rules stating that maidens must hide their faces with a heavy veil before the wedding. According to this law, she was instructed to head to the groom's country completely unseen. She violently realizes that the rule to hide her face was actually a non-existent tradition they completely invented on their own. Despite heavily relying on the veil during preparations, she acknowledges that the royal court must have already seen her face clearly. Her heart drops as she lists the terrifying number of people who have now witnessed her exposed identity. She accepts that Lady Nile, the maids, the Dragon King, and nearly all the important figures attending the ceremony have seen her completely unveiled. Trembling violently, the horrific truth finally crashes down upon her. She realizes with absolute certainty that they must have already figured out she is a completely different person and a false bride. Despite uncovering this terrifying realization, she notices a baffling inconsistency in her surroundings. She questions why, if they know she is an imposter, their polite and respectful treatment of her has not changed at all. Desperately searching for logic, she questions the operational efficiency of the formidable enemy kingdom. She wonders how a great nation with so many elite subordinates could ever be that shockingly sloppy in sharing vital information. Analyzing her own glaring flaws, she admits she is not exceptionally beautiful by any standard. Furthermore, she notes with dread that her hair and eye color are entirely different from her sister's perfect features. The complete lack of hostility from the royal staff leaves her deeply bewildered and paranoid. She theorizes that instead of showing anger, they are simply troubled and currently deciding what to do with her. A sudden, terrifying thought forcefully pierces through her escalating panic. Stopping in her tracks, she whispers a horrific realization to herself, bracing for the worst. She furiously recalls that the initial agreement clearly stated the ceremony was supposed to be extremely simple. Attempting to rationalize the chaos, she guesses that because it was all so sudden, the staff must have been completely overwhelmed just preparing things. Looking back at the Dragon King, her paranoia spikes to absolute maximum levels. She frantically wonders if the nobles are currently discussing why the bride is entirely different than expected. The crushing reality sets in that she only saw the terrifying Dragon King briefly during the ceremony itself. Panic rising, she realizes she didn't even speak a single word to him, fearing what will happen if this deadly silence continues. Searching her frantic memories of the ceremony, a specific detail suddenly floats to the surface of her mind. Come to think of it, she vividly remembers the officials addressing the imposing Dragon King as Lord Cain. The terrifying image of Lord Cain's intense, piercing gaze burns vividly into her mind. She shudders just remembering the overwhelming, commanding weight of his silent stare. Trapped in her own memories, her frightened eyes remain wide with lingering shock and awe. She recalls the exact moment she was forced to look up into the ruler's devastatingly powerful face. Despite her overwhelming terror, she cannot deny the sheer, undeniable majesty of the Dragon King. She admits to herself that his features are beautiful beyond words, shimmering brilliantly like a living jewel. The crushing weight of her massive deception finally breaks through her defensive bravado. Bowing her head in deep shame, she agonizes over what a terrible thing she has done to such a majestic person. She deduces his incredible worth by recalling how visibly delighted everyone at the ceremony was in his presence. Acknowledging his perfect posture and flawless behavior, she concludes he must be a great king, comparable even to the legendary late king. Gripping her dress tightly, she tries to find a tiny sliver of hope in this nightmare. She notes quietly that she is deeply grateful she hasn't been cast out immediately, but the suspense is killing her. The oppressive silence and lack of immediate punishment violently shreds her fragile nerves. Hugging herself in the grand hallway, she confesses that she is so terribly uneasy. A sudden, polite voice sharply cuts through her spiraling cycle of dread and despair. Startled out of her terrifying thoughts, she gasps loudly as Lady Nile abruptly calls her name. The elegant head maid gestures gracefully toward a pair of massive, imposing wooden doors. Announcing that this will be her room, the suddenness of the arrival prompts a startled, squeaked response from the exhausted bride. Lady Nile bows apologetically, explaining there were some minor issues and the room is not fully prepared yet. The bride frantically waves her hands, insisting they shouldn't worry, while secretly dreading that this minor issue is actually a huge mistake. Staring at the entrance, she logically compares the massive doors to the excessively luxurious hallways they just traversed. Her stomach drops as she firmly concludes there is no way they would put a false bride into the grand room meant for the true bride. Inspecting the entrance closely, she realizes this specific door alone is completely plain and sparsely decorated. Nodding in grim acceptance, she steels herself, completely believing this blatant downgrade is her expected treatment for being an imposter. The heavy wooden doors slowly swing open, revealing the mysterious space waiting within. As the room is finally unveiled, her eyes blow incredibly wide in absolute, stunned disbelief. Overwhelmed by whatever lies beyond the threshold, her previous expectations are instantly shattered. Standing frozen in the doorway, she mutters in shock that she cannot complain about this outcome, not even one tiny bit. The grand reveal leaves her entirely speechless and utterly paralyzed. She simply stands there, completely dwarfed by the reality of her new, unpredictable life in the Dragon King's palace. Lady Nile gestures to the surroundings, asking the bride if the lovely room pleases her. Stepping behind her to style her hair, Lady Nile confirms the arrangement while vaguely apologizing for the mistake. The maid explains that although her nation claimed she loved red, they hurried to change the originally crimson room after hearing she actually preferred amber. Bowing in apology for the incomplete decor, Nile unknowingly triggers Amelia's panicked realization about a casual carriage conversation regarding her favorite color. A cold sweat breaks across the fake bride's face as she realizes the true Amelia's favorite color actually is red. Her mind races back to the preparations, recalling how her handlers deliberately provided Amelia's information to avoid future complications. Trembling internally, she curses her own oversight, wishing she had at least checked what details the officials had shared despite the reckless and sudden plan. Forcing a bright, overwhelmed smile, she praises their wonderful preparations, though she immediately worries her enthusiastic reaction sounds far too forced. Frantically backpedaling, she stammers out a weak compromise, claiming that while she likes red, she also has a fondness for amber. Though she insists the room is more than enough, the accommodating Lady Nile promises to immediately prepare absolutely anything else she might need. The fake bride's eyes suddenly lock onto a nearby hourglass, her shock bubbling up as she recognizes its glowing contents. Her eyes widen in pure, unadulterated disbelief at the sight before her. Overwhelmed by their lavish attention, she weakly begs the maids not to trouble themselves so much over her. Staring intently at the beautiful seven-colored glow, she internally refuses to believe what her eyes are telling her. The radiant glow commands her full attention, the glittering fragments seemingly holding immense power. She finally identifies the sparkling fragments tumbling into the pile as legendary stones. Trembling at their sheer value, she recalls that rainbow stones are an extremely rare gemstone, so precious that nations literally fight wars over them. Turning to the head maid for confirmation, she is met with Lady Nile's calm, serene agreement. Visions of a monstrous bird and serpent clash in her mind, reminding her that a single rainbow stone was the very spark that ignited a massive war 10 years ago. Completely bewildered, she stammers out a question, unable to comprehend how so many of these priceless rainbow stones are casually sitting in her room. Lady Nile casually explains that the domestic stones act as charms against evil, revealing that they specifically placed the highest quality ones in Lady Mireille's chamber. Hearing her true name spoken aloud, a heavy realization crashes into her as she concludes that Lady Nile and the others remain completely oblivious to her status as a false bride. Staring at the opulent tea set as Nile offers to replace anything unsuited to her taste, Mireille reasons that no one would ever waste such dazzling treasures on a fake bride. Shaking her head slightly, she firmly concludes that such a scenario is completely impossible. Trembling slightly under the weight of their hospitality, she graciously accepts the cup and offers her nervous thanks. Lifting the elegant porcelain to her lips, she takes a tentative, quiet sip. The flavor is absolutely divine, leaving her to marvel at the gorgeous room filled with glowing stones and a delicious tea she has never experienced before. A heavy wave of guilt washes over her as she watches the diligent maid's work, resolving that she cannot let Lady Nile and the others continue to serve a false bride. Squeezing her eyes shut, she feels utterly tormented by the fact that these innocent people are treating her so kindly while knowing absolutely nothing of her deception. Summoning her fleeting courage, she loudly calls out Lady Nile's name, shattering the serene silence of the room. Gripping her dress, she formally acknowledges the wonderful room and the delicious tea they have so graciously served her. Internally theorizing that the Dragon King must already know she is an imposter, she decides she must find him immediately to offer a proper apology and explanation. The head maid turns with a graceful bow, respectfully asking what request the lady wishes to make. Gathering her resolve, Mireille nervously asks if it is at all possible for her to arrange a meeting with the Dragon King. Lady Niall appears visibly taken aback by the sudden request, clarifying if the bride truly wishes to meet Lord Kane. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly as the other maids freeze in sheer shock at the incredibly bold request. Frowning slightly, Lady Niall explains that meeting him before the marriage ceremony will be difficult, prompting a deeply confused reaction from the bride. Lady Niall drops a massive bombshell, revealing that dragons only marry on the summer solstice and that today's event was merely a provisional, non-binding preliminary ceremony. As the maid politely questions if she was never told, Mireille's mind races to process the fact that the marriage was never truly finalized today. A colossal wave of relief washes over her, making her want to scream her thanks to the heavens. She mentally berates herself for spending the entire day terrified that she had successfully forced a complete stranger into a fraudulent marriage. Tears of pure joy prick the corners of her eyes as the beautiful reality sets in that the marriage ceremony is not actually over yet. Slumping back into her luxurious chair, she lets out a long, exhausted breath. Utterly drained by the relentless emotional whiplash, her body simply refuses to carry any more tension. Her fingers weakly grip the ornate armrest as the last of her adrenaline rapidly fades away. Her weary eyes slowly flutter, struggling to maintain focus after such a stressful revelation. Misinterpreting her relief, Lady Niall bows deeply, apologizing for the rushed timing and promising to personally arrange a meeting with His Majesty. Mireille internally groans that her brain simply refuses to work because she is far too tired, admitting that this entire mess serves her right. Despite her profound exhaustion, she realizes she desperately needs to plan her next move. Somehow, she has accidentally managed to secure a highly coveted audience with the Dragon King himself. Tightening her fists in her lap, she pushes past the fatigue to reaffirm her ultimate goal. She still desperately wants to find a way to help her struggling homeland. A delicate hand rests against the fabric as she wonders if there wasn't another way. She regrets that none of this nonsense would have happened if only she had stopped her father more firmly back then. Looking at the others, she realizes with heavy guilt that she has caused so much trouble for the Dragon King. She knows she has caused trouble for the others as well. The crushing weight of her actions makes her feel like she truly is a failure of a princess. She feels she has failed everyone else as well. Her self-deprecation is suddenly interrupted by a soft clinking sound that draws her attention. Despite not knowing what will happen to her from here on out, she resolves to face it. She focuses entirely on the distinct, melodic sound of a rainbow stone falling. Staring in awe at the massive collection, she admits she will probably never again see so many rainbow stones in her life. A sudden memory surfaces, reminding her that Verm was even more dazzling than these precious gems. A lingering thought trails off in her mind as she hesitates. She observes the mystical stone closely, watching its mysterious glow change colors depending on the angle. Her memory flashes back 10 years ago to the day of the prayer festival, right before the end of the war. The vivid image of a young boy's bright, striking eyes fills her recollection. A mysterious boy with dazzling rainbow-colored hair and big rainbow-colored eyes appeared in the forest. She initially thought this ethereal figure was a simple forest fairy. She excitedly calls out to Verm, showing him the amazing discovery that a twin fruit came out. He agrees with a bright smile, declaring it the most delicious fruit he has ever tasted. They marvel at the twin fruits, noting that they are a good omen and that wonderful fortune will surely fall upon them. Sitting happily beside each other, she expresses her gladness as he admits he loves them too. Verm gently holds the fruit and explains that the fact there were two inside means it is a sign they should share it. He claims the Chusha fruit as his own and promises to give Mireille some good fortune as well. He reveals that in his country during marriage, a couple unites their magic and splits it into two by taking it into their mouths. They become each other's one and only partner. Blushing at the implication, she thinks this feels just like a wedding ceremony. Verm eagerly promises to grow up fast. He confidently declares he will come get Mireille right away and asks her to wait for him. Returning to reality, she remembers how she told everyone right away, but they just laughed and refused to believe her. The crushing skepticism of others made her eventually assume it must have simply been a kind dream. She recalls how he disappeared immediately after saying that, leaving only the amber sky remaining in his wake. Gripping the edge of the table, she finds strength in the thought that even if it was just a dream, it mattered to her. She acknowledges that she could keep going even when attacked. That precious memory with Verm was her guiding light and shield. A stone clinks softly as she reaches out, her heart heavy with the realization of her current dire situation. Lowering her eyes, she tearfully questions if she even deserves to wait for him anymore. Her thoughts briefly shift as she wonders if the legendary Chusha fruit actually grows here as well. A sudden crack snaps her out of her daze, drawing a quiet gasp from her lips. She stands alone in the opulent room, her gaze drifting toward a beautifully crafted bowl resting on the table. She cracks open one of the shells and stares in absolute shock at the twin fruit resting within her palms. She remembers that the first time she saw one was when she met Verm. The only other time was during her very last tea time with Lulu. Tears spill down her cheeks as she realizes the third time is happening right now. She weeps over the broken halves, devastated that now there is absolutely no one left to share it with. The morning light breaks the next day. She reflects that, in the end, she managed to spend the entire night without being condemned. Operating strictly under the pretense of a tea party, the diligent Lady Nile successfully arranged a formal audience for her. Sweating profusely, she acknowledges that just being granted a chance to meet him is an honor beyond words. However, she is completely terrified by the incredibly heavy atmosphere of the room. Glancing around at the stern officers lining the table, she panics internally, wondering if she has just walked into a literal military meeting. The Dragon King sits at the head of the table, his piercing, slit-pupiled eyes locking onto her with intense focus. Later, utterly drained from the overwhelming encounter, she collapses back into her chair and lets out a massive sigh. Guilt gnaws at her heart once more as she admits it pains her deeply to receive such kind treatment from Nile and the others. She pushes herself up from the chair, knowing that her secret cannot stay hidden forever. She anticipates the inevitable moment when they all finally discover that she is nothing but a false bride. Staring blankly ahead, she assumes the scandalous word has already spread throughout the entire castle by now. She hides beneath the furniture, reflecting that the time spent waiting entirely alone was incredibly frustrating. Knowing it is rather improper, she justifies her actions as just a little slip in manners. She resorts to using one of her few actually usable abilities, eavesdropping. Pressing her ear toward the gap, she holds her breath and listens intently to the hushed conversations outside. 3 uniformed servants whisper among themselves about the rumors they have heard regarding the sudden changes. Resting her head on the surface, the young woman realizes her ability functions perfectly even within the Drake Kingdom. She notes this success with quiet satisfaction. She utilizes her Kikimimi power to eavesdrop on distant conversations. Her unique trait allows her to pick up sound frequencies from far away. Initially fearing it would not work if the other party was a dragonkin, she reflects on her unique skill. This power is recognized as a primitive ability exclusive to the rodent tribe. She considers how unexpectedly useful this unrefined skill is in a place like this. Keeping it a secret in her homeland, she continues to listen closely to the gossip. The maids nearby gasp in shock as they discuss a sudden staff overhaul. One confirms the rumors, noting that the personnel are being completely replaced. The gossip intensifies as they mention a specific woman causing an uproar. They whisper that Lady Nile herself is quite distressed by the situation. The replaced staff were individuals possessing both magical power and prestigious lineage. The maids remark that this elite group was composed of personnel selected with the utmost care. Trembling as she remembers that specific moment, the girl realizes the gravity of the event. She deduces that something undeniably serious must have happened to trigger such changes. Surrounded by imposing figures, she deduces the reality of her hostile environment. She understands they must have implemented strict security measures against her. Bowing beneath the sheer weight of their hostility, she struggles to maintain her composure. The intense pressure makes it impossible for her to even lift her head. In the center of the room sits a young man with a cold demeanor, occupying a grand chair. A stern, bespectacled aide stands attentively at his side, projecting absolute authority. The entire room kneels in solemn silence before the seated figure. The atmosphere grows incredibly tense as the audience waits for him to speak. Standing tall among the roses, the royal guards maintain their vigilant watch. Their sharp eyes remain fixed on the perceived intruder. Keeping her gaze fixed firmly on the ground, the young girl remains perfectly still. She embraces her submissive posture to avoid provoking the hostile court. The heavy silence stretches on, amplifying the incredibly solemn atmosphere. Every attendant remains frozen in absolute deference to the throne. The bespectacled aide narrows their eyes, analyzing the kneeling girl with piercing scrutiny. They show no hint of warmth or welcome. From his elevated seat, the young ruler stares down with an unreadable, icy gaze. He assesses the fragile prisoner kneeling before his domain. She accepts that the court views her as a dangerous person who falsified her status. In their eyes, she is nothing more than an uninvited intruder. She marvels at their strict combat readiness against a young girl lacking significant ability or magical power. She reasons this extreme posture is solely to protect the Dragon King. Breaking the heavy silence, the young king levels a devastating accusation. He coldly declares her to be a spy. The royal guards erupt in fury, cursing the mere rodent tribe member for her insolence. Looming over her, they viciously proclaim that she is doomed. Confirming her worst fears, she realizes her deception has been fully exposed. Desperate to mitigate the damage, she blurts out an apology and confesses to being the false bride. The room falls into a stunned, suffocating silence following her abrupt confession. The heavy stares of the elite guards bore into her trembling frame. The overarching threat hangs heavily in the air as the court condemns her homeland. It is decreed that the Kingdom of Grills will receive a fitting punishment. Panic grips her as she realizes this diplomatic disaster could develop into an international problem. She knows her missteps could easily turn into the complete destruction of the Kingdom of Grills. Fearing she will easily lose even more trust, she hesitates to reveal the full truth. She refuses to talk about the real bride because she does not know what actions Emilia might be taking. The terrifying stakes crystallize in her mind, leaving no room for error. She resolves that she absolutely must not make a wrong move. Sweating profusely under the kingdom's collective glare, her mind races for a solution. She frantically tells herself that she has to find a way out. The young king continues to stare her down, demanding immediate answers from his throne. She realizes she must formulate her defense right here and right now. Swearing to absolutely protect her homeland at all costs, she urges her panicked mind to think. No matter what happens to her, she vows to craft a clever plan. Her frantic internal monologue is suddenly interrupted by a voice cutting through the silence. A cold voice questions the matter, demanding her attention. Startled by the unexpected tone, the young girl jolts her head upward. She lets out a confused gasp as she processes the sudden question. Meeting her gaze directly, the Dragon King repeats his inquiry with an unreadable expression. He calmly asks her what the matter is. Her mind reels as she tries to interpret his seemingly gentle prompt. She wonders who is truly the one in trouble here after all. Completely thrown off balance, she stares back at the ruler in utter bewilderment. Her carefully constructed defensive plans crumble in the face of his calm demeanor. The entire royal court watches in silence as the tense exchange unfolds. A beautiful, young girl sits defenseless directly in front of him. A sudden, terrifying realization dawns on her as she analyzes his words. She lets out a soft gasp as the true meaning behind his question clicks into place. She wonders if he is indirectly referring to the catastrophic bride mix-up. Her pulse quickens as she tries to navigate his subtle verbal trap. Swallowing hard, she struggles to find the appropriate words to appease the king. She hesitates, trapped between a confession and further deception. Calculating her odds of survival, she decides the safest option is to remain guarded. She quickly concludes that explaining the full truth in this situation is still impossible. She suspects his words, which seem like concern on the surface, are a carefully laid trap. She fears his polite inquiry might actually carry a different intention. Paranoia sets in as she wonders if he is merely trying to probe her true thoughts. She tightens her emotional defenses against the psychological assault. Looking up at his enigmatic gaze, she attempts to mask her sheer terror with a polite facade. She nervously wonders if she managed to smile properly. The Dragon King observes her forced expression and breaks the silence with a quiet murmur. He simply states that he understands her unspoken message. Startled by his blunt response, her fake smile immediately falters. The king firmly declares that there isn't anything left to say. Desperation clawing at her chest, she attempts to salvage the crumbling situation. She bows her head deeply and shouts out a frantic apology. Masking her inner turmoil, she resolves that this vague apology is the only way she can answer. She commits to this dangerous charade purely for the sake of her country. Peeking through her lashes, she observes the Dragon King's subtle reaction to her stonewalling. She panics upon realizing that he looks visibly disappointed by her response. The king shifts his posture, seemingly dismissing the failed interrogation. Surrounded by glaring guards, the girl lets out a nervous hum as her fate hangs in the balance. A hand gently extends toward the nervous girl, offering her some refreshments. She hesitates, unsure of how to navigate this sudden gesture of hospitality. Sweat beads on her forehead as she internally debates the etiquette of someone of her lowly status speaking casually to him. Realizing that staying completely silent would indeed be rude, she finally acknowledges the title Lady Mirai. Clutching her garment, the young woman peers upward with wide, anxious eyes. She braces herself for the impending interaction, struggling to mask her underlying fear. Scanning her surroundings, she takes note of the stern expressions plastered across the faces of the guards and staff. The hostile environment only amplifies her feelings of isolation. Finding a brief moment of solace, she reflects on the staff's overall demeanor. She realizes that only Lady Nile has consistently treated her with polite courtesy since her arrival. Looking up at the kind attendant, the girl's tense shoulders finally relax a fraction. She offers a sincere thank you very much for the warmth she has been shown. Lady Nile gently informs her that today, she has a tea party scheduled with Lord Kane. Stepping forward, the attendant declares they must prepare her immediately for the important event. With a warm and attentive gaze, Lady Nile checks on her young charge's well-being. She politely asks if the girl managed to sleep well despite the tense circumstances. Escorted to her dressing room, the girl marvels at the exceptionally high quality of her garments. She admits she was so flustered during the ceremony that she didn't get a good look at the fabric and embroidery. Lady Nile suddenly calls out for Lady Mirai, drawing her attention back to the present. The attendant prepares to finalize the girl's elaborate ensemble. Staring at the opulent accessories, the girl is utterly mesmerized by the sheer number of tiny gemstones. She marvels at the craftsmanship, wondering just how many jewels are actually sewn on. Lady Nile gracefully redirects the girl's attention toward her chest. She carefully evaluates the neckline of the dress to determine the perfect accessories. The attendant hums thoughtfully, placing a finger to her chin as she studies the young bride's appearance. She calculates the best way to enhance the girl's natural beauty. Bowing her head in gratitude, the girl thanks her caretaker for everything she has done. Lady Nile warmly replies that she is completely happy to assist her. Noting how beautifully the dress pattern shows, Lady Nile suggests it might be better without a necklace and offers earrings instead. The girl's mind goes blank, remembering when diamond earrings were completely beyond her station. Straightening her posture, the girl makes a firm resolution regarding her behavior. She vows that she absolutely must not cause any more trouble for the kind Lady Nile. Despite her resolve, a nagging confusion gnaws at the back of her mind. She desperately wonders what in the world the recent strange occurrences actually meant. Seated at a massive dining table surrounded by guards, she searches the room for some kind of clue. She knows she must think of a way to skillfully convey the truth before the situation worsens. A sweeping hand gesture cuts through the heavy atmosphere of the dining hall. An elegant man addresses both of them, casually stating there is no need to be so tense. The bespectacled man smiles warmly, asking them to please relax and enjoy the tea more. The girl lets out a nervous humph, still visibly on edge despite his polite reassurances. Offering his apologies for the late introduction, the man formally presents himself as Zergis. He expresses his pleasure at meeting Lady Mirai and reveals he serves as the Chancellor. The girl lets out a quiet gasp of surprise upon hearing his prestigious title. Lady Nile quickly steps in, explaining that Chancellor Zergis is Lord Kane's uncle and asking her to remember him. Observing the Chancellor, the girl is struck by his incredibly mature and commanding aura. She notes that despite being 18 years old, he carries a presence that seems far older than her same age. Sipping her tea, she recalls a fascinating rumor about the royal family's ages. She remembers hearing that the Dragon King is actually only 3 years older than Emilia. Her mind races as she processes the sheer magnitude of Zergis's accomplishments. She finds it deeply impressive that someone so young has already risen to be Chancellor. Zergis politely remarks that he heard she did not eat much last night either. Panicking slightly, she quickly excuses herself by claiming she just has a small appetite to begin with. Unfazed by her excuse, the Chancellor promises they shall prepare something highly nutritious for her. He assures her the upcoming meals will be incredibly easy on the palate. Desperate to avoid offending her hosts, she quickly praises the royal kitchens. She loudly insists that in that case, the food she previously ate was also very delicious. Xerxes explains their ultimate wish is to ensure her health is perfectly maintained. He smoothly points out that at any rate, a dragonkin wedding is a lengthy process requiring absolute endurance. The Chancellor notes that the temperature and climate here must differ in many ways from her homeland. The girl internally marvels at such unexpected consideration from a high-ranking official. She offers a hesitant thank you, entirely bewildered by his accommodating behavior. Behind her forced smile, she frantically questions why he is being so incredibly nice. Narrowing her eyes slightly, she studies the smiling Chancellor with growing suspicion. She silently wonders why Lord Xerxes is treating her so much as the actual bride. Her logic dictates that a man of his immense status wouldn't be kept in the dark. She concludes there is absolutely no way the Chancellor hasn't heard about the bride mix-up. Ignoring her internal panic, Xerxes reminds her there is still time until the solstice wedding ceremony. He warmly encourages her to feel completely free to spend her time in her room exactly as she wishes. Caught off guard by his suggestion of leisure time, the girl's mind goes completely blank. She mutters the word hobbies to herself, utterly unfamiliar with the concept of free time. Xerxes presses further, asking what kind of things she actually likes to do and offering to let Nile prepare any hobbies she needs. As she repeats the word hobbies, the girl nervously wonders if this is just another method to probe her true intentions. Cornered by the question, she panics and blurts out the first skill that comes to mind. She loudly declares that she is exceptionally good at calculating food stockpiles. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly descends upon the elegant tea party. Xerxes adjusts his glasses in bewilderment while the young king stares at her with a completely unreadable expression. Standing dutifully beside the royal table, Lady Nile blinks in absolute shock. The attendant struggles to process the wildly inappropriate hobby the supposed bride just confessed to. The imposing royal guards exchange utterly baffled glances with one another. They clearly cannot comprehend why a high-born lady would brag about inventory management. The tension in the room thickens, freezing every single person at the table in place. The young girl realizes the sheer absurdity of her answer as the awkwardness echoes through the hall. A forced, trembling smile stretches across her face as she tries to hide her mounting horror. Internally, she violently curses herself, muttering darn it for making such a foolish and peasant-like blunder. She knew perfectly well that inventory management wasn't a hobby befitting her supposed noble position. However, under pressure, something deeply familiar had simply slipped out of her mouth. Staring into the king's piercing eyes, her internal monologue devolves into absolute panic. She realizes that no matter how she tries to spin it, this answer is fundamentally no good. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts as she detects an immense magical power radiating nearby. She trembles, wondering if the oppressive aura is actually a faint feeling of royal anger. Slumping in her chair, she realizes her slip-up has completely shattered her noble facade. She fears that at this rate, it is exactly like she is openly declaring herself an imposter. Her imagination runs wild with terrifying visions of immediate and brutal execution. She assumes she is going to be cut down right here, even before she gets the chance to offer any explanation. Just as she braces for death, a voice cuts through her escalating panic. Surprisingly, Xerxes praises her for having such remarkable diligence and incredible foresight. Stepping forward to break the tension, Lady Nile offers a warm, reassuring smile. The elegant attendant gracefully declares that she believes such a practical skill is truly wonderful. Chancellor Xerxes offers a nod of approval, completely validating her bizarre answer. Mireille exhales a heavy sigh of relief as the tense atmosphere finally begins to settle down. She glances around at the stoic faces of the royal attendants. The overwhelming pressure of the gathering seems to have passed. Overcome with gratitude, she turns her attention to the head maid. She silently praises Lady Nile for flawlessly smoothing over the awkward situation. It was a perfectly timed follow-up. Breaking the silence, the bespectacled Lady Nile officially concludes the day's tea party. She respectfully announces that their time is up. Lord Kane remains seated quietly, absorbing the declaration. Startled by the abrupt ending, Mireille blinks in utter confusion. She looks around the empty room, wondering how the event could already be over. The brevity of the meeting catches her completely off guard. She sits rigidly in her ornate chair, a growing dread pooling in her stomach. Despite her expectations, the delicate matter of the false bride was completely ignored. It seems no one intends to address the elephant in the room. Stepping forward with practiced grace, Lady Nile turns her attention to the young ruler. She respectfully informs Lord Cain that it is time for him to return to his official duties. The Dragon King listens without immediate protest. Watching him prepare to leave, Mireille's mind races with political context. She recalls the recent news spreading through the kingdom. Lord Cain has only just ascended to the throne. She considers the massive political weight of the Drake Kingdom. Acknowledging a diplomatic error of this scale would be unprecedented. Correcting such a massive blunder would be incredibly difficult for a major power. A heavy sense of resignation washes over her as she connects the dots. She accepts the harsh reality of her diplomatic predicament. The truth is simply too inconvenient to address openly. She deduces the royal court's likely strategy regarding her identity. Acknowledging a mistake with the bride so soon after his coronation would look terrible. It would severely damage his public image and project weakness. Her mind flashes back to the events of the recent harvest festival. The truth remains that she was a last-minute substitute. The girl present was not the first princess, Mireille grills.